Hi, Dan Stein, President of FAIR. Thanks for joining for another important FAIR update. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button if you want to stay in the know on everything we're doing here at FAIR and the immigration crisis that the Biden administration has created, hopefully may solve at some point. We're going to drill down on some important issues that have been written on the blog that FAIR has. If you haven't been there, you need to go to it. It's immigrationreform.com. That's immigrationreform.com. And I'm joined by the capable Madison McQueen, who's a staff researcher here at FAIR, works in our research department, and puts out great material on a range of immigration topics you need to know. And we're going to be covering three of those recent blogs, it's been about the last week or so. And if you haven't been to immigrationreform.com to read the actual blogs, I encourage you to do so. And there'll probably be a few more from her and many others before you get there. So anyway, thanks for joining me, Madison. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, you've written an important blog recently about a story that doesn't get a lot of attention right now, which is our beleaguered Border Patrol, which is right now being asked by the Biden administration to do its job without any meaningful interior enforcement. And you had some information about the state of morale for these Border Patrol agents. How are they holding up?
They are exhausted and frustrated. It's really a dire situation on our border right now. The apprehensions for April alone were about 179,000. And that's surpassing 2018 and 2020 for our totals right now. And if we continue on this road, we're going to far surpass 2019 as well, just shortly here. And Reuters did a study they interviewed a bunch of CBP staffers, and they all had a consensus of just being frustrated with the handling of the crisis. Many of them are expressing desires to retire early. And this is just sad. I mean, they're tasked with protecting our border. The Biden administration continues to tie their hands, especially with the catch and release policies. Many of the CBP interviewees discussed how they just feel like this is a waste of time, that they are starting to feel like what they're doing doesn't really matter because they're catching these illegal aliens. They're having to rescue many of the migrants that get stuck out in the desert by smugglers. And then they release them into our interior. They're getting so frustrated that some CBP members have started selling coins that say U.S. Welcome Patrol instead of U.S. Border Patrol. And this is just not a way to treat our law enforcement at all, and especially our immigration law enforcement, as they're putting their lives on the line. They're having to intercept smugglers and drug cartels, which is very dangerous, and they're understaffed. So they're just facing all sorts of issues on all sides. And it really is sad that the situation they're being placed in, especially the ways that the administration just doesn't have their back and is refusing to enforce our immigration law.
Yeah, I think the big core question here is if you're a Border Patrol agent and you know that the government behind you is doing everything they can to reward and encourage and incentivize and even aid smuggling of aliens and working effectively with cartels, what on earth would make you want to risk your life every day to go out there on the line to try to protect our borders?
Exactly. I think that there would be a very little incentive to do so anymore. And like I mentioned, CBP is already understaffed. They're already facing long hours. And then with the staff leaving and retiring early, there's not enough people that are interested in becoming CBP to then fill those places. And so it's just going to be a continuation of being stretched thin, working long hours, and really feeling like your job doesn't matter. And when we have a job and we're working, we want to feel like what we're doing matters, like we're making a difference. And when you're tasked with protecting the US, protecting our citizens, guarding our border, but the administration that backs you doesn't have those same priorities, you start to feel like your job doesn't have that same meaning anymore. And that's exhausting. That adds to the lack of enjoyment of your job anymore, especially with something that is so physically taxing as well as emotionally taxing, like protecting the border.
Okay, well, hopefully the situation will change. But if you're a Border Patrol agent, I don't know why you would want to keep doing this work. But thank goodness they are, Madison. Thank goodness they are.
Yes.
Now we're seeing more Venezuelans coming across the border. What do we know about that?
This is actually abnormal. We don't usually see a lot of Venezuelan nationals coming up to our border. And in April, more than 1,100 Venezuelan nationals crossed illegally into West Texas alone in the span of 2 weeks. That is very abnormal for right now. Obviously, they're fleeing political socialist policies and an economic downturn in their country. But for them to come this far up and in such large numbers is really abnormal. we
Well, the
think that it's,
administration gave temporary protected status
Mhm.
to all the hundreds of thousands who were here already, right? Didn't that send a signal to all the
Yes.
Venezuelans who'd been effectively displaced, going to Colombia or Chile, which is now, by the way, kicking them out? Do they ought to
Mhm.
come up here?
I think that's a large portion of it. I mean, yes, Biden just granted TPS, which is temporary protected status. As we know, that is supposed to be temporary, but it's often rubber stamped by presidents. And so it
Oh,
kind of turns into a de facto amnesty in a way of people see this as a way to come to the US, never have to leave. You get temporary legal status, you get a work permit. And so that's drawing a lot of people to our border as well, because people see, oh, Venezuela has TPS now. It's not just going to end in 18 months, it's going to keep getting rolled over. And so it's drawing more people to our border. And we already have about 300,000 Venezuelan nationals in the US who will be granted that temporary legal status and the work permits because of the TPS designation. So that plus the fact that Chile is kicking out Venezuelan nationals, giving them 180 days to leave the country if they got there illegally, it's definitely pushing people further north.
so how does this fit in with Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris's position that everything is about the root cause of pressures from the Northern Triangle countries, and that all of her focus is in nation building to root out centuries of corruption, systemic cartel trafficking, drug trafficking, and a culture of outmigration in those countries? She hasn't addressed at all Venezuela, Brazil, or any of the other countries that are south of the Northern Triangle, has she?
She has not, and she, as we know, has not done much to address the border crisis at all since she's been appointed the head of this issue. And especially with the way that much of the radical left open borders agenda pushing these policies, they don't want to admit or acknowledge the detriment that that causes. And with Venezuela, they're fleeing these policies. There is stuff that we can do, and that is building up, having humanitarian aid, sending monetary funds to the country to support people there, rather than spending all this money to transfer people to the US and then create a further tax burden on American taxpayers to fund these people.
Now, just a personal point of privilege here. You're relatively new at this. I've been doing it for almost 40 years. Put you on the spot, though. What's been the most surprising or shocking thing you've discovered since you've been able to spend full time professionally working on this topic?
I think the most shocking thing to me is, the argument against immigration reform and the way that we see it is about caring for the person. The argument from open borders is that, oh, well, we want to welcome people, we want to care for the person, but the reality is that's not caring for the person. We want people to succeed when they come to the US, and by incentivizing illegal immigration, we're not only putting these people in grave danger. Eight out of 10 women and children are raped, abused, on their journey across the border. But we're also not giving them a place to succeed. They're coming into the US. They are, low skill, often uneducated. They go on our welfare programs, and it's just enough to survive, but not enough to go anywhere. And so I think that's something that has solidified my opinions once I've gotten a greater knowledge of the immigration issue as a whole, is that the way that we see immigration reform, it truly is caring for the person, of saying, we want you to succeed when you come here, because when you succeed, America succeeds. And it's building people up so that they can have that quality of life. And that just isn't possible if we have unchecked migration coming through our border, especially illegal unchecked immigration. It's just adding to this problem, adding to tax burden. It's disadvantaging the people that are trying to come to the US legally. And I think that's the biggest thing for me that drives me forward, is wanting to support the people who are trying to come to the US legally, making sure that they can succeed, making sure that we can set America up to be able to move forward and not continue to add more tax burden to the American citizens, and disadvantage not only American workers, but also legal residents as well.
Yeah, part of what brought me to this issue so long ago was the recognition that countries that have a culture of sending people out of the country are actually very depressing places to be.
Mm-hmm.
And from the recognition that it didn't really help our country, except, of course, narrow interests who profit from reduced labor costs, it obviously didn't help the sending countries. And reading some Irish short stories from the early 20th century, it's surprising how bleak and dismal it is for the people who are left behind, when you have a culture that sends the more entrepreneurial or ambitious out of the country, theoretically to send money back home, but it's not healthy for a country to build that kind of expectation in. And you can see that the countries we've been allowing this to happen from have all struggled over the last 50 years to improve what they're doing. So, I mean, you put your finger on it, the misplaced compassion of those who don't understand why it's important for a nation like the United States to be able to decide who comes through a democratic process, through Congress, that this kind of ordered liberty is essential for not only national self-determination, but in advance of our own foreign policy objectives as well. Moving now to this topic of Arizona. Now, Madison, really now about 5 times in the last 15 or 20 years, since really about 2000, Arizona voters have in one way or another expressed a very strong and clear position that they do not want illegal aliens getting public benefits in Arizona. They voted for propositions like Proposition 200 to encourage state and local police to cooperate with the federal government. They have done everything in their power under Governor Brewer when she was there, and since then now, to try to convince the federal government to help Arizona support and control its borders. Yes, there are people fleeing California going to Arizona. Maybe they're changing the politics a little there. But the point is, voters have repeatedly expressed this position. So now there's another proposition going before the legislature, which involves apparently mostly Democrat support, but there are some Republicans who voted for them. Can you tell us about what's going to be on the ballot?
Yes, so Arizona voters will be given the chance to vote in 2022 on whether illegal aliens will receive in-state tuition to state universities and colleges, as well as community colleges within Arizona. This is called SCR 1044, and the Arizona House passed this ballot referral on May 10th, and it was 33 to 27. So very contentious. The Republicans in the House were opposed for the most part. There were a couple of Republicans that joined the Democrats on this issue, but the Republicans that did speak out talked about how this disadvantages the students that are in the state who have been here, that this ballot will require that illegal aliens only need to be in the state for 2 years. And that's very short amount of time. Again, as you mentioned, Arizona voters have made it very clear in the past where they stand on this issue. In 2006, they voted on Proposition 300, which barred illegal aliens to receive in-state tuition, and that passed with 71% of the vote. So again,
Hispanic plurality of Hispanic voters.
Mm-hmm. So it's a huge issue, and people don't realize what kind of tax burden, again, this creates. And, DACA recipients, they're another group of people that previously had in-state tuition within Arizona, but the state Supreme Court ruled that they are disqualified from receiving the subsidized tuition. And so that was in 2018. So they have not been allowed to receive in-state since then. There are currently 6 states, including Arizona, that bar illegal aliens from receiving in-state tuition. And in states that have high illegal alien populations, and in the states in general, on average, they spend about $44 billion on public school costs and post-secondary tuition assistance. And so this is, again, taking things away from American citizens. And the big argument on the Democrat side—
in most cases, most vulnerable American citizens.
Mm-hmm. The big argument on the Democrat side was, oh, well, these illegal aliens that come from low-income backgrounds, so they must need this assistance. But the reality is that there's plenty of American students who come from low-income to moderate-income families who need this assistance, and their families have been paying taxes to support these things. So they should be given priority to receive in-state tuition. And instead, it's being the opposite, where illegal aliens are getting the benefit. They're getting breaks on tuitions, and American citizens are on the back burner. And we've seen that a lot, even in Texas, where illegal aliens were allowed to have access to grants, and that decreased the share of money that was able to give to students trying to get into college. It decreased the amount of money given to each student, and the applications to receive these grants skyrocketed after this law passed in Texas. And so I think that we're going to see that in Arizona. And we'd hope that Arizona voters stick with their gut and where they've been voting. But as you mentioned, there have been a lot of Californians fleeing the state to Arizona. And as we know, they have typically vote the same way they've always voted. So that could put us in a different position. But giving in-state tuition, it disadvantages, again, continues to disadvantage American students, low-income families who need this money, who should be given priority, and unfortunately just aren't.
Well, FAIR's been working in Arizona to try to push these various proposals and initiatives for many years, so people can be sure we'll be down there trying to fight this, just like we've done everything, helped to do everything else, or worked with others in Arizona to try to bring about these good policies. We're going to be fighting the bad ones. Okay, I just want to remind you, you want to read Madison's content on our blog, immigrationreform.com. It's great stuff. We have excellent blogs there all the time. Certainly want to subscribe to our videos and like them, which always helps with generating viewership and eyeballs. I'm Dan Stein, and I want to thank Madison McQueen for joining me, and we'll be back with you again with some more excellent FAIR immigration content and news you can use. Thank you.